We will be talking about the redistricting overview, the board redistricting overview. So we have Beth Pendergrass, she'll start, our Chief Communications Strategy and Engagement Officer, and then we also have Michael Sharp from Research and Polling on with us tonight. We'll hand it over to Beth.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam President Galbraith, Dr. Cleveland, and members of the school board. Again, this is Beth Pendergrass, Chief Communications Strategy and Engagement Officer for Rio Rancho Public Schools. As Dr. Cleveland mentioned in her opening remarks, we are here this evening to talk about redistricting our school board boundaries and not our school boundaries. I always want to make that clear because one seems to be a little more controversial than others, and parents don't like to have their school boundaries changed. So this is for board member districts. As a reminder, school districts that elect their board members via single member districts are required to redistrict every 10 years after the release of the US Census population data. The data was released this past fall, so it's time for us to complete our redistricting process. Research and Polling has managed this process for us in the past, and they have decades of experience in redistricting school districts and other government entities. We'll be using them once again to navigate the process for us. So with that, we do have with us this evening Mr. Michael Sharp. He's the Vice President of Research and Polling, and he is going to speak with the board this evening a little bit about redistricting and the process. So I would like to turn it over to Mr. Michael Sharp. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me, and I'm unmuted myself. And so thank you very much for having this evening, that kind introduction. My name is Michael Sharp with Research and Polling. We've been, that's the cover slide, I guess, but the next slide will just show you just really quick. We have a lot of experience with respect to our staff. I think we first started in Rio Rancho when it was first split off from Jemez Valley and APS back in the mid-90s. And so we've been fortunate enough to assist the school district in the 90s and in 2002 and then 2012 after the census is back then and again this year. And so we hope that we'll be able to answer any questions you have. And we also have worked on the Rio Rancho City Council. And so a little bit of experience in the area. So hopefully you can, again, answer any questions that you have. And so I wanted to go briefly over just the concepts of redistricting, just give you a general overview of kind of what is redistricting and who does it. And so one of the things that people ask is, well, how much influence do other entities have over the school board districts? And so it's always good to just get an idea of, oh, you have your legislative districts, you have county commissions, you have city councils and commissions, and who's responsible for those districts when they're redistricted. And on this slide, you can see that the U.S. House of Representatives, or U.S. Congress, the state legislative bodies, the House and the Senate, as well as the PEC, those are both all the responsibilities of the state legislature and the governor. We just went through that process through a special session I guess a month ago in December. And then the county commissions, they also redistricted last year. They're responsible for their own city councils and city commissions, depends on the election cycle that they participate in. Rio Rancho has had their election in March, so they actually redistricted last year, whereas other cities will redistrict this year, the same as the school boards. So the school boards are required by law to redistrict in the calendar year following the release of the census data. So that is in there by statute. Somebody may say, well, geez, you had your election in November of 21, that in normal census years, the data would have been released in March, and people may ask, well, 10 years ago, why can't you redistrict prior to the elections in 2000, I guess it would be 31. But the law says you must redistrict as a school board in the calendar year following the release of the census data. So the census data was released in 2021. So you are required by law to redistrict in 2022. This is the responsibility of the school board. No one else has any authority over what your districts look like. So the legislature can't tell you what your districts look like, city council, county commissions, and so on. So it's just a quick idea of who redistricts in general. So it's up to the school board. So what is redistricting? It's basically just redrawing the lines such that when you're finished, when you determine your boundaries, you know which folks are represented by which board members. And this is dictated by a number of different things. And the one that is most applicable to Rancho Public Schools is that it is dictated by statute. Statute says that if a school district has greater than 16,000 people, according to the most recent census, then you must redistrict. Well, Rio Rancho Public Schools has over 105,000 people, so I think you easily exceed that threshold. So if you can meet that threshold, though if you're lucky, you might not actually have to redistrict if the population change was equally distributed throughout the city. If your city grew by about, or school district grew by about 16%, if every single of your existing board districts grew by 16% as well, you may not have to redistrict. So a lot of times it's due to statute as well as to the distribution of that change over the past 10 years. You know that within the school district, you have had some parts of the area grow more quickly than other areas due to new construction and so on. And so those districts will tend to be overpopulated and will have to change. So we just talked about when we redistrict, and we have to use the most current population data available. The census does produce estimates, but they're not at the level we need to do any sort of redistricting. And so the decennial census is the most accurate data that we have, and it's the one that we're required by law to use. So I'm going to go over principles of redistricting. There are 5 basic ones. I like to call the first 4, I guess, your picture frame. If redistricting is the process of creating a picture or or a piece of art or whatever happens to be, and it's bounded by 4 sides by frame, you have to have a pretty solid frame to have your picture in the middle be solid. So the first 4 criteria, equal population, minority voting rights, compactness, and contiguity, are the principles that have been guided by statute or court cases. And so those kind of make up our frame. And then the communities of interest is everything else. And that kind of determines what it looks like inside the frame. And so the next one we'll look at will just be, in terms of equal population, who gets counted. And so on the next slide, we'll have who gets counted. And really briefly, it's everybody. The long form would be it's adults, kids, citizens, non-citizens, college students in the dorms. Everybody is counted by the census officially, no matter what your status is or your age. And then in terms of where folks are counted, it's where you live and sleep most of the time. So if you have children going to New Mexico State or even UNM, they would be counted at the dorms, assuming they're not living at home, physically living at home while going to school. So it's where you live and sleep most of the time. So constitutional mandate to redistrict a number of court cases that just set forth the concept of one person, one vote, or equal population means equal representation, such that no matter where you live throughout the school district, you have the same representation as anybody else. The board member who represents you represents roughly the same number of people as some other board member in a different part of the school district. In this past process for congressional redistricting, the districts have to be as equal as possible or as practicable. So I think the districts were, within plus or minus 50 people or 100 people or less than 0.01%. But the court just said, well, for smaller entities or entities that's not Congress, including school boards, the districts are considered equal if their deviation population is no more than 10%. We'll get into that definition in a moment. But basically it means that the deviation should be no more than plus or minus 5% from the ideal population, which is on the next slide. And so how do we figure out that ideal population? How do we figure out what that equal population should be? So you take the school district's total population, 105,966. And by the way, that's a 16% increase, almost 16% from 10 years ago. Take that 105,966 divide by 5, the number of board districts. And so in a perfect world, every district would be 21,193 people. Remember I mentioned the deviation. The courts have said, well, unlike Congress, with respect to, say, school boards, the districts can be substantially equal. They don't have to be perfectly equal in population. You take that 21,193 people, and you can go above or below that by 5%. In fact, it's in state statute that in order to be considered equal population, you have to stay within plus or minus 5% of that ideal population. So that gives us a range. You take your 21,193 plus or minus 1,059, which is that 5%. And if every district is between 20,134 and 22,252, then they're considered equal in population. The nice thing about having this leeway is it can allow us to keep some neighborhoods together while drawing the districts, or keep some developments or communities together. If the districts had to be perfectly equal in population, we might have to split more communities. Another question that comes up is, when you're drawing the districts, are they based on population or registered voters? The answer is it's based on total population, so everybody who was counted in the decennial census. Okay, the next one is minority voting strength. And in essence, it means that when you have ethnic or language minority groups, you must allow them an opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. And within New Mexico, the communities that have a population that's large enough and compact enough would be the Hispanic and Native American communities, where we were able to draw majority Native American and majority Hispanic districts throughout the state of New Mexico. The African American population is sizable within the state and within the community, but the population isn't large enough such that you could create a majority district of African American folks. We need to consider this. We need to provide the opportunity, but we can't use race or ethnicity as the only criteria subordinating other principles, such as the equal population or the other two we'll mention in a moment. The interesting thing about Rio Rancho is that while the school district is about 40% Hispanic, that Hispanic population is evenly distributed. And there's no way to create a majority Hispanic district within Rio Rancho. It's fairly unique. It's interesting. So I just wanted to make sure that folks understand that while the district is 40% Hispanic, roughly, that it just isn't possible to create a majority Hispanic district within the school district. Okay, the third side of our picture frame is compactness. A lot of different ways to measure it. But basically, it's just a matter of if it looks compact, it probably is. It refers to the shape of the district as opposed to the geographic size. So if you ever see maps of the legislative districts for the state of New Mexico, you'll notice that a district in Albuquerque is relatively small compared to a district in northeastern New Mexico that stretches from, Oklahoma all the way down to Clovis, a couple hundred miles. But that's just what it takes to get the number of people every district needed. So it's one question that comes up is why does the questioner's opinion is, why does the district not compact when it's really just the shape? It doesn't really matter how big it is. It's just the shape that matters, really. The next one is it can be affected by irregular outer boundaries for Rio Rancho Public Schools. That's not really much of an issue. So we tend to look at the inner boundaries between districts. So some quick examples. These are all from 91, but I just wanted to make it apples to apples. So we have New Mexico's 3rd Congressional in 91. That's relatively compact. That's northern New Mexico down to about Clovis on the southeastern part. And then the two on the right are two districts that you would say are not compact. The one on the upper right is Houston, and the district in green, that is one district, and with really, really narrow slivers that connect every piece to each other. The one below is North Carolina. That was both of these were created to maximize minority the number of minority districts, but the Supreme Court said it violated the redistricting, other traditional redistricting principles, and said they were unconstitutional. So when we're drawing districts, we'll make sure they're compact, more like New Mexico's third, as it existed prior to this past year, and as opposed to the ones in North Carolina or Texas. So the fourth side of our frame is contiguity. Can't have any islands. Every district has to be made up of one piece and not two or more. So the one on the left, all the districts are contiguous. The figure on the right, you'll see that District A is in two pieces, so it's not contiguous. For that particular test, I like to say, when you look at a map and you put your pencil on a district, you have to get to every other part of the district without lifting up your pencil. Okay, so finally, we have the legal and constitutional requirements. Now we get to what are called communities of interest. And really, this is what I think generates a lot of the discussion. Once we know or meet the other criteria, how do we actually draw the districts? And a lot of different things that we can look at. We can look at political subdivisions, for example, precincts, don't split precincts. You can look at existing neighborhoods, communities, developments, geographic boundaries, major arroyos, Highway 528, whatever it happens to be. You can look at existing districts. So do you want the districts to be similar to what you have today, or would you prefer to see something different? You can look at where the existing board members currently reside, such that when you're finished with redistricting, there's still one board member per district. It's certainly possible, and it has happened in the past, where incumbents have been, I guess, paired in a single district after redistricting. So there's two, say, board members or city councilors or whatever happens to be within the same district. And so one thing that you could look at is how important is that? You can look at avoiding the pairing of board members if you so choose, but you don't have to. And we can look at all of these communities of interest as long as they don't violate the previous redistricting principles. And so these communities of interest, you can consider them all, and you also find out that they may conflict. You may want to keep communities together, but on the other hand, in order to make districts which are equal in population, you might actually have to split a development. And so there's lots of kind of a give and take and a balancing act in terms of trying to balance the communities of interest as well as meeting the other redistricting principles. So none of the plans are perfect. We don't have any plans tonight. So this is an introductory kind of intro to the process. And when you do see the plans, just remember that no single district is a vacuum in and of itself. And if you see a plan and you say, well, Michael, would you like to, or not would you like to, could you look at, making a change between districts 1 and 5 or whatever it happens to be, that we have to know that whatever change you make to one district, it will impact at least one other. It may cause a domino effect. You might go from District 1 to 5 to 3 to 4, and one change might necessitate 5 or 6 others. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. As mentioned earlier, a lot of different factors to consider, and that sometimes they work against each other. And so that's one of the reasons why these plans are rarely ever perfect. There's almost always something about a plan which isn't necessarily ideal. When you do see the plans, none are necessarily set in stone. They're examples of what could be done. You may find that you really like 1 or 2 of them, and that's fine too, but we can also modify them as long as those modifications still meet the requirements, and they're intended to initiate discussion. So with respect to the redistricting process itself, we're going over the ABCs of redistricting right now. In subsequent meetings, we can condense this presentation so a little bit shorter. Since we've heard it once, a little bit more detail. We'll get public input as well as input from the board. We'll be showing plans, getting the input. If we need to modify the plans based on the input, we can do that. and present those plans at subsequent meetings. And eventually a redistricting plan will be adopted. Once it's adopted, then we send a lot of information to school administration as well as the county clerk's office, where they will then go through the process of assigning voters to the correct districts in preparation for resolutions and finally dates, and then finally the election. And these districts will take effect for the first time for the election coming up in November of 2023. So that's the first for the districts that are up for election in November of next year. Okay, so you have current districts, obviously, and so I thought it would be good to give you an idea of where you are right now. And so we talked about population change. And so the school district has grown by about 16%, just under 16%. And if you remember on one of the previous slides, redistricting can be required if that distribution of that population growth is not equal throughout the district or throughout the school district. And so the first column, 2010 is population 10 years ago, 2020 is just released, change in raw numbers, and then the percent change is really what we're looking at. Any district that grew at a different rate than the school district as a whole. So school district grew at 15.9%. Let's take District 1, for example. It grew at 28%. It grew faster than the district as a whole. So you would expect that District 1 would have too many people, that it might have to shrink. District 2 is a little bit less. It may or may not have to add people. District 3 grew much faster than the school district as a whole. So you would expect that it would have to lose population because it's too big. District 4 did not keep pace with the school district as a whole. That's District 4 is in a spot of town that really doesn't have much room for additional development. So it's kind of landlocked, if you will, not very much infill. And then District 5 is pretty close to the school district's rate of growth as well. So it might be very close to where it needs to be. So on the next slide is just a quick map of your districts. And then in the table, so we saw the growth rates. Well, here's actually the population of each district. Again, but this time, how far away from the ideal population? Remember, the ideal was 21,100 roughly. And you can see that, yes, District 1 is about 2,000 people above the ideal. That's the deviation column. And it's about 9% above where it needs to be. Every district has to be within plus or minus 5%. So we can see the District 1, it will need to reduce in population. I'll have to shed some population. District 2 is at negative 3.7. It's within plus or minus 5%. So theoretically, it wouldn't necessarily have to change. District 3 is a little bit above the ideal population as well by 9%. So it has too many people have to shrink. District 4 is, like I said, it's the one really hasn't had much growth, and so it didn't keep pace with the rest of the school district. And so its deviation is 3,000 below the ideal, and it's low by almost 15%, so negative 14.8. And then District 5 is almost right on. And so when we kind of look at where these districts are located, if you look at, say, Districts 2 and 5 in the northern and central part of the school district, theoretically, you might be able to leave those two alone. And then since District 4 has to expand, and Districts 1 and 3 need to shrink, one potential option, just by the way, is you can take District 4 into District 1 and District 4 into District 3, and it accomplishes evening out the population for those three districts just by working with Districts 1, 3, and 4. So that's probably an option that we'll look at. But I just wanted to show this just so you could see the implications and the population pattern that occurred throughout the city. Districts 1 and 3 have to shrink. District 4 has to grow, and potentially 2 and 5 don't need to change at all. But one thing I do like to remember, at least for myself, is these districts were created or adopted by the board 10 years ago. The board today may have different priorities and different ways of looking at things, and so Just because a district is already within plus or minus 5%, it doesn't mean it's not going to change or it doesn't need to change. So I think on the next slide, which is the last one, this is just the population table for all the districts. It has total population in the white row and then the adult population in the gray row. And I guess the important part of this is I mentioned earlier about the percent Hispanic, and that bottom row, it shows you under the Hispanic column that it's 42% Hispanic total population and 38% adult Hispanic for the school district as a whole. But then if you look at the Hispanic population for each of the districts, they're all within 34 to 42% adult Hispanic. If you actually looked at that distribution throughout the school district, it would be relatively even separate. I don't think there's any part within the very few parts that even neighborhoods or communities or blocks that are even greater than 50% Hispanic. So I found that pretty interesting because it's pretty unique with respect to the Rio Rancho community. And so I believe that's the last slide of note, and I'm open for any questions that you may have. I know it's a lot of info, but I'll try to answer them as best as I can. Thank you.
All right. Well, first I want to say thank you. That was actually really, really helpful to look through all those. And I loved seeing all the numbers and just how we've grown. I've grown up in the city, so it was really interesting to see the growth that's taken place here. So thank you for that presentation and pulling all those things together. Before I go over to the board for other questions, I just want to go over to Dr. Cleveland really quick and see if she has anything, and then we'll go to the board for questions.
No, I really don't, but thank you, Michael. It's really helpful, and it's a really interesting process. As you go through it, I think you'll find it very interesting, and you do learn a lot about the district. And one just really kind of quick aside is that our population is, I think it's 40% Hispanic, but our children are in our district, 55% Hispanic. So I think that's an interesting, that has interesting repercussions. It shows the number of children, young children that we have from our Hispanic populations. And I assume that our Native American, though it's an important part of our district, we now have 2,000 that claim some Native heritage, about 1,000 fully certified, is not a large enough group to have a particularly big impact on our district.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah, it's just so interesting to look at all those things. So thank you. All right, we'll go over to our board for questions. Start with Noreen Scott, who has her hand raised. Go ahead, Noreen.
Yes, my question is, of the 5 items that you listed, does anyone carry more weight than the other? Equal population, minority voting rates. Is there one that you have to be sure that it's got priority?
Madam President, Board Member Scott, I'd say the population is the most important one.
Okay.
No matter what, every district must be within plus or minus 5% of that ideal population, no matter what.
Thank you.
And then the others are required by law or constitutional. If you can make them, contiguity has to be accomplished. You can't really have a district in New Mexico. You can't have a part of a district in Clayton and another part in Lordsburg. So, but and the others are the voting rights. We would create districts if we could, but we can't. And compactness, I think we do our best to make districts that are reasonably compact.
Thank you. And thank you. The statistics were very interesting, and it makes me very proud of our community. We're really an open community that welcomes folks, and that makes me feel good.
All right, Jeffrey Morgan, any questions, comments?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I was going to ask, how was it counted? It's based off population, not voted on. That was very, very good information. I love numbers, love to see statistics, different things like that. So good to see. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jessica Tyler?
No questions, but I look forward to the process and thank you for your presentation. It was very informative.
And Gary Tripp.
Madam President, Michael, thank you. It was really a quality presentation, and I thank you for that. One thing that interests me is the fact that I look outside District 1 and I continuously see about 400 homes that are just the foundation is laid. So by the time the redistricting process gets done, I kind of wonder how big some of these districts are going to get, even after we balance them for a whole decade. But it's great. I look forward to the process. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's the best part about Rio Rancho, right? It's ever changing.
Yeah.
It's ever changing. That was a great 16% population growth. So that's awesome. Beth, did you have anything before we go on? Just want to make sure. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Michael. And if there's anything else that you want to add before you go tonight, we just appreciate you coming out tonight and being patient with us. So,
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. It should be an interesting process. Just FYI, 10 years ago when Rio Rancho went through redistricting, 10 years ago, they had deviations just because, you know, I like numbers too, but there were some districts that were 65% above where they needed to be, and ones that were 26% below where they needed to be. So 10 years prior, there was a ton of growth, a lot of growth, these, you know, from 2010 to 20, but while you change, you didn't quite change as drastically as you did for the previous redistricting. I thought that was interesting. So if you'd ever want to see those numbers, let me know.
that's awesome. All right.
All right.
Well,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us tonight.